Hi, welcome to What's in the Box with Parris Rigby, episode 6. Today, we're going to talk about suspect number 2. By 2013, this shit show of the century, aka modern day Bonnie and Clyde, it was in full force. Suspect number 1, Shell Rios, was gaining other suspects to commit her crimes by the dozens. Whether you were a main suspect 1 through 7 or you were a minion, they were coming out of the woodworks. I don't know what was told, but I can tell you this. You may know suspect number 2 from being a recipient of one of her famous death threats, like I was. Like Maria Reyes was. Maria is married to the well-known and well-respected attorney, Angel Reyes. And if you remember on episode 1 of Real Housewives of Dallas, season 1, I think it was episode 1, first season, Leanne showed her true colors for the very first time on the Real Housewives of Dallas. When she went on there and went totally suspect number 2 style and threatened to kill Maria Reyes. She's also threatened to kill her castmate, quote-unquote best friend at the time, Deandra Simmons. Deandra almost got a TRO, a Texas restraining order, against suspect number 2. So did I. However, you may also know suspect number 2 from being the unfortunate recipient of some of her violent acts of impulsiveness. For example, the Halloween party at Sambuca in 2012, when the valet line let out, and it was all of a sudden a jam, because at 2 o'clock in the morning, everybody was wanting their cars and ready to leave. And she actually got behind a cab. The cab couldn't move. She jumped out of her car. She pulled a woman by her dreadlocks through the actual window and literally opened up the cab door and was kicking this woman in the ribs so hard that Gary Rugoff, a very dear friend of mine, another victim to this situation, as well as knew Leanne, stood out behind the car going, Leanne, 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 like saying her name over and again, till she came out of that infamous trance. The woman ran inside. She was foaming at the mouth. I have never done a drug in my entire life, so I immediately assumed that maybe she had done a drug. So I had the officers come over and dump her handbag out. It wasn't until the next day when I was having lunch with Gary and we spoke to Leanne on the phone that he made mention of what happened and I pieced it together. You may have also been the lucky recipient, or the unfortunate recipient of a hit and run. If you were riding a motorcycle between the years of 2015 and 16 and you were lucky enough to survive, but that car, that Mercedes, that old Mercedes, drove off. It had a sticker on it that would kind of be prominent, but there was blood left on that car. I hope you survived. And if you were the unfortunate recipient of the beating that you took from suspect number 2's unwavering, impulsive, abusive acts, let me know. I've always wanted to apologize to you now that I put the facts together. You may have also been the unfortunate recipient of a beer bottle, being positioned over your head at D. Lincoln's Bubble Bar. D. Lincoln had absolutely nothing to do with this at all, but unfortunately, suspect number 2 had a vendetta for Julia Decatur. Julia Decatur has had her unfortunate events in life, as we all have. However, this particular evening, I was there, and I saw everything happen. I was shocked. But unfortunately, Julia dated this suspect's current husband, boyfriend at the time, so therefore you became, Julia, an instant target. I've always wondered, and I've always admired your strength, but I've always wondered, did you have to get stitches that night? Because I was so shocked, and I'm sorry that happened to you. You might have also been the unfortunate recipient of being a business partner with this individual. And me, as a non-business partner, but an outsider looking in, I saw nothing but abuse. The business partner, who is also a victim to the situation, who is one of the most amazing, kind-hearted people in the world, was dealing with her own trauma at the time. I didn't know that. She just moved from Colorado. This individual was being abused verbally, and I saw it with my own eyes. Sometimes people want to work hard. Sometimes people want to take credit for other people's work. Sometimes people want to claim and give you every reason in the world to believe that what they're saying is true. That all falls in line with suspect number 2. You may have been the unfortunate recipient from the most amazing law enforcement, because as you know, I'm a huge supporter of law enforcement. When suspect number 2 was pulled over in 2012 or 13, I can't remember the exact date, but I have it in my notes over there. I just didn't pull it. And she was dating her now husband, who was a SWAT officer for Dallas at the time. And he asked her, the officer did the fortunate act of saving other lives by asking her if she was driving drunk. Rather than responding with candid authenticity and maybe the pills that we all know that this person takes illegally, but it's legal if you get them the right way. Therefore, this person, she told the officer no, she wasn't drinking because she had been pulled over and she was pregnant with a SWAT officer's baby. Well, this particular officer, there was only one SWAT officer, which is her now husband, was the only person that was actually single. So he knew who to contact. And I give Rich Emberlin the utmost credit because Rich Emberlin, from the person that I know, has always stood ground. And I'll give another example in a second. But on this particular case, he wouldn't even go to court with this suspect. He said, no, I'm not going to do that because you made a bad choice and you lied because you're not pregnant. So, again, many kudos to law enforcement. You may have been the recipient of the abuse just by being her quote-unquote best friend. Tara Harper, myself, Deandra Simmons, and a line of people have been the unfortunate recipients, I said lucky being sarcastic, of her abuse and her demise. And the pattern, because somebody very wise in law enforcement, who I just think deserves the Officer of the Century Award, told me one time in 2016 that criminals make a pattern. So this person not only commits crimes, as you will learn, but this person also does a pattern in choosing who they're going to be around, and then they crucify them. Tara Harper, Parris Rigby, Deandra Simmons, and a whole line of people can tell you. That's just part of the character, or lack thereof. You may have also been a castmate on The Real Housewives of Dallas, which is a very popular show on Bravo. Andy Cohen will tell you he sat there during that final reunion of the final episode, which was not the final season of Real Housewives of Dallas, but the season prior to, because this person was asked to leave for her discriminatory acts, and finally the impulsive abuse that she displayed came out, and they had had enough. And it became a liability, in my opinion. Andy Cohen and I don't know each other, but I've been told, and I do believe, that it was a liability to not only the network Bravo, but to Andy Cohen. Because impulsive acts as an adult that turn into violence and abuse, you can't have that, even on the Housewives. Even when a table's being turned over, there are still boundaries. However, on that particular reunion, every one of the castmates was accusing this particular suspect of committing crimes electronically. I, Parris Rigby, don't really watch a lot of TV. I just tend to use my time putting this together, educating my mind, reading, who knows. However, on that particular day, my eyes were glued to the TV. And I ran to that TV like the Dallas Cowboys had scored the touchdown of history. I was screaming at that TV because every single thing that all of her castmates, every one of those castmates from Deandra on down, were accusing her of doing things electronically. It is of my opinion, and I feel safe to say this, none of them knew how to write computer code, how to do cyber forensics, or had evidence that this person actually did it. They didn't know of a crime lab in Dallas or Houston or anywhere, or where to take their devices. And I believe that they were all probably traumatized, borderline Stockholm syndrome, which I believe her previous business partner has, and maybe somebody in her life right now does, because she tends to put that on people. It's freedom of speech, and that's my opinion. But my truth is, I watched that episode and I ran to that TV and I was screaming, going, oh my gosh, every single thing. And I had arsenic in my body at the time, just so you know, I was poisoned with arsenic. Not saying Leanne did it, but I was. And I was so ill that I was throwing up and I had rashes like breaking out, and my lymph nodes were so swollen, but by God, I saved my energy for that episode. Not knowing that I was going to exude the only energy that I had on that episode, when her castmates were actually accusing her of doing exactly what I have evidence of in this room. Today you will see some, not all, but some of the evidence. So when you walk around Dallas, Texas, and you scream at the top of your lungs that I, Parris Rigby, am crazy, that I don't know what I'm talking about, and that she's innocent, today I'm going to show you otherwise. You may also know this individual as being a God-fearing, which I do believe in God. He is my higher power. I don't judge others for their higher power, but I don't walk around, kind of like some preachers do, and they're really sexual abusers. Not saying she is, but she used the God, in my opinion, freedom of speech, complex, to demise the true person that this devil actually reaps from. You will notice that she put up everyday inspirations, which really purposely made me and those that were recipients of either her physical violence, her hacking, or her death threats. They made me want to puke. But, those that drink the Kool-Aid or those that don't know, you were part of her inspirations, you were part of her inspirations, and you were part of the biggest, what I would consider right up there with Bernie Madoff's, con. You write a book about bullying at any age is wrong? Well, I, Parris Rigby, am here to tell you that Leanne Locken, that's who suspect number 2 is. She goes by Leanne Locken Emberlin at the moment. And oh, by the way, she takes bullying and the Webster's Dictionary to a whole different level. Because sometimes what you say to somebody when you give them those death threats, or when you cause tortious interference, or you hack people's devices, their emails, their computers, or you're the recipient of everything that goes on somebody's computer, their Internet Explorer, as all you will learn, or you claim somebody who was your best friends, that they're lying about the suicide, the unfortunate act that their biological father committed, but you're the only lucky recipient of some medical examiner report. Bullying is at its finest. This person, Leanne Locken, she makes bullying, just like suspect number 1, Shell Reyes, in my opinion, freedom of speech, makes con people look good. Leanne Locken makes any bully I have never heard of, read about, been the recipient of a bigger bully. Suspect number 1 is the con of the century, the con of American history. Leanne Locken, freedom of speech, is the bully of all bullies, and she wrote this book. I guess that would be what we would call in therapy a facade, because you will need therapy, as I have, from being the recipient. For years, as I stated earlier, she claimed her innocence. She unsolicited told people for many, many years, even up to 2 years ago, as I was just told about 2 months ago from a mutual friend of ours, that she claims her innocence. However, in 2013, and you will learn about this historical charity event, this historical event that money was supposed to be donated, but oh, by the way, one of the other hosts and victims to the situation, but he's now deceased. He literally said to me on the phone, and I get chills telling you this today, he looked me in the face and said to me on the phone, Leanne Locken does not know which ship to jump. Meaning, does she jump on my ship that is telling the truth, or does she jump on Shell Reyes' ship, which by the time this podcast is done, I will prove that she's the biggest con in American history. Right now, that's my opinion, and it's my freedom of speech. First Amendment, but I'll prove it. However, in 2013, I filed a federal civil suit against Shell Reyes. As I stated earlier, I got rebutted and all that, but I will say this. At that time, I was told, my attorney looked me in the face and he said to me, quote unquote, who else is involved in this demise? We said it at Starbucks. We had to go on a hidden, because of all the, stalking. I mean, you name it. I was stalked. You'll learn this. But all the following me and all the getting things in my phone and all that stuff, we had to go to a hidden location. And we actually I felt like I was part of like some high bureau technological, like law enforcement. We had to meet at a location, break apart, go to another location. It was like crazy. And he looked me in the face and said, who else is involved? I, at that time, said, no one. Because I don't put you on the suspect list unless I have evidence. And it's not just evidence, but as a non-attorney, I believe it's evidence that can be proved in court. In 2013, my wonderful attorney said to me, Parris, who else is involved? And I don't just put people on the suspect list unless I have evidence. As a non-attorney, I hope to go to law school, do it online, but as a non-attorney that I believe is admissible and would be admissible in the court of law, especially based from a cyber forensics standpoint. So I don't just stick you on the suspect list because your name came up or because you were, friends or in a picture with somebody or you just came in my head. You get on the suspect list, which is lengthy at this point because they must have been recruiting people like crazy, because I have evidence. But in 2013, when he asked me that question, I literally had to take a deep breath, and I was like, no one, because I didn't know of anybody else. I didn't want to believe that the person that I thought was my best friend at the time was actually part of my over a decade demise. It wasn't until 2013 that Leanne Locken Emberlin said to me, and at this time, I was sensing that I was having home invasions. I was sensing that things were off. My emails were not going through. My computer, when I would get to what I call a smoking gun, maybe I was doing a trace route on a magical IP like 166.147.71.32. Maybe I was doing something and it would go network error. So I was being monitored, I knew that. But you can't just scream at the top. I mean, I guess you can, but you look like a true nutbag, as I've been accused. Maybe I should be after all this, but I'm not. However, I remember sitting down with Leanne Locken. I debated whether I was going to ask her to be a hostess to the 2013 Halloween party. I debated that based on, as you will learn later on in this podcast, because of money that she'd stolen from the PayPal and tried to justify it doing that, the money that she'd walked out the door, and because I always go with my gut. I'm not perfect, and I wouldn't want to be, but my gut always tells me what is going on. But when my attorney, Dr. Nick Oberheiden, said that to me at the magical second location we had to go to, because I felt like I was part of law enforcement under this secret situation, but he knew that it was blowing up. However, the reason why I asked her, Leanne Locken, aka Leanne Locken Emberlin, to be a hostess to my 2013 Halloween party wasn't because I'm an idiot with my head in the sand, wasn't because I didn't know different, because I really wanted to know, was she, Leanne, a part of my demise, or was she, Leanne, a puppet being posed? But I quickly learned, and I was even though that event was very painful for me, and I was stolen from, and our charity didn't get any recipient that year, I'm glad I did it. That entire day of the event, Leanne wanted the login to PayPal. Leanne has never had the login to PayPal because Leanne has been one of those that, as you know, screams at the top of her lungs. She's not one that does accounting. However, she was over and over and over. As I stated earlier, Freddie Robinson, who's now deceased, who's a victim, said she didn't know which ship to jump on. However, at that time, I knew, and you'll learn later on about that event, but I knew because I let her, Leanne Locken Emberlin, be a hostess to my Halloween party. That onion unpeeled faster than I've ever seen an onion, even on fast forward on the YouTube unpeel. Leanne said to me before a dance practice at the Hilton Anatole, and we were sitting across from each other. I was here, she was there. She said some things to me that made me the hair turn up, which I don't have on my back. Chills from head to toe, and I get them right now as I speak to you. What she said to me was, because remember I said I didn't tell anybody that I was suspecting home invasions. I'd lived in that home since 2007, this was 2013. I never had a problem. My computer was working fine, But she said to me, and I hadn't told anybody that my clients weren't receiving emails, that I hadn't told anybody that my computer was all kinds of stuff was happening, and that not only were clients not receiving emails, there was a lockbox with my initials on it. I hadn't told her about the laser that pointed through my place. I hadn't told her about the home invasions because I would have looked like a true certifiable, in my opinion, nutbag, level 10, if I would have said, somebody's coming in my home and you don't have proof. So as I said in the previous podcast, maybe the one before, I'm not the person that sits back and goes, oh, makes accusations. I sit back and observe and watch. And this I did, and it served me right. So Leanne told me before we had a dance practice for our Halloween parties where we as the hosts were taught a dance routine by Shella Statler, who is a very famous choreographer. She's choreographed for the Mavericks, the Stars, the movie Magic Mike. And I made a point of, call me whatever you want, buddying up to what I thought was my best friend. Because I'm not some big boob party girl, as Leanne has cloned me. My brain expands more than most. So I made a point of having drinks with her, Leanne, that I missed you. I told Leanne that I missed her and I wanted to, and I'm not a diabolical person, but it was my life. We sat down and she looked across from me at the Hilton until that bar that was there, and I'm here and she's there. She says to me, Parris, you're not a criminal for the act of committing the crime. You're only a criminal if you get caught. Leanne Locken, Emberlin, consider yourself caught. You also told me that day that your biggest fear at that time in 2013, which is 1 decade, 10 years prior to this date, maybe a few months shy, because it's April and that was October 2013, 2023. You told me that your biggest fear, and you said that you told Cheryl Reyes, suspect number 1, that I was not going to give up and that I was going to watch this till the end. Well, you know what, Leanne? Consider yourself foreshadowing, because I am going to watch this to the end. Consider yourself caught through this mound of evidence that I have right here, as well as a binder full. And I mean, I did 2 episodes on your little companion, Cheryl Reyes. But wait till this podcast is finished, because, oh my God, it doesn't stop. But you also said to me to buy a computer and to never, ever, ever take it out of my home, which I found interesting because I hadn't told anybody at that moment that I was having computer problems, because I was still crying to Dell computers. I taught myself 4 computer languages at that time, but I didn't understand the dynamics of IP addresses and trace routes and geo-tracking and all those things that are so beautiful and that come with open source. And I didn't understand what happens when when somebody puts a what's that called, a router, or somebody tries to hide their IP. I didn't understand all the forensics aspect of it at that time that I did. I do today. But at that time I was collecting evidence like you wouldn't believe. So when you told me to buy a computer, Leanne Locken Emberlin told me to buy a computer and to never, ever, ever put it in my home, to take it to some office. And at that time, I had a virtual office that I could have utilized office space. Leanne told me to take that and put it in a drawer and never bring it in my home. You know what, Leanne? Thank you so much, because that resided in my head for over a decade now, and I understand fully, as there's a room full of evidence, as to why you said that. You also told me that I told you at that time I was 2 years into the biggest hell that I don't know anybody could go through, which has lasted 12 years now. The reason I'm still alive is because I believed in myself and because I had that tenacity and I taught my brain. Somebody named Clint Emerson, an ex-Navy SEAL, told me about the brain and brain power and how he would literally sit in a ditch for 20 days on end, and it was his brain that kept him going. So I took that advice and I took what you said many years earlier, and I'm here today. And yeah, I'm not letting go. So with that being said, you also told me that when I called Leanne Locken that spring of that fall of 2013, and I was at Javier's, which is a very well-known upscale Mexican restaurant in Dallas. And I was there with a very dear friend of mine, a longtime friend of mine, Greg Thompson. And we were there with a friend of Rich Emberlin's, which Rich is a phenomenal guy. We were there, and I called you because I was noticing there were routers attached to your IPs. And I was noticing that Leanne was trying to hide her IPs through everything she was doing. And you told me, quote unquote, just like Hillary Clinton did in the 2016 election when she walked out of a school And a reporter said, I heard you're wiping your devices. She goes, oh, like a blue cloth? You told me, quote unquote, that Rich Emberlin wipes your devices clean. Number one, I don't believe that Rich Emberlin would do that. But, I now understand Leanne, why Leanne tried so hard to move out of her house and to get she and Rich, not only she wanted to be on the same roof with Rich, but I fully understand now why she wanted to be under that roof so hard and so bad. Because she knew I was onto something, and as she stated herself, I wasn't going to give up. We're just a decade later. I also have absolutely, and I'm going to say this, I'm going to take a time to say this, because Rich Emberlin is a former Dallas SWAT officer. He is very well known in the community of Dallas, Texas. He was on, I don't know the name of the TV show, excuse me, but it was on a TV show for his abilities, and I'm very much of a law enforcement supporter. If I didn't believe in Rich, I wouldn't even bring it up. I would never put law enforcement down, I wouldn't bring it up. But I will say this, there is absolutely zero evidence that Rich Emberlin, who is now retired, but now works for a company called 540 Solutions, that he has had any involvement at all in any of this. And I will also back that up with the last time that I was with Rich Emberlin and Leanne Locken in their home, just the three of us, that I've never heard Rich raise his voice ever. But when he was talking about the computer, which I now know is law enforcement grade technology on that computer, he was very adamant with Leanne that you don't touch that computer, you don't do anything with that computer. And because Rich is a very good guy, he's tough, but he knows where his toughness is to be asserted and not, and I never heard, he didn't use cuss words, I remember, but he was assertive. Well, Rich, that day I went home throwing up and went to the hospital. Not that it was anybody's fault, but I'm going to tell you this, Rich. I didn't realize until later on in this ball game, as we will all know through my podcast, that through a IT person that works in security, that your computer was what would be termed as law enforcement grade. Which, call me Pollyanna, I didn't know. But there was one time right before you moved out of that apartment to move into the home that you're in with Leanne right now, where she was sitting at your computer and she was doing something, and I don't know what she was doing, but I can say this. Julia Decatur, the woman who she threw a bottle over her head at D. Lincoln's restaurant, she actually got on that computer or was sending Allison Ainsworth and Missy Laurent and I text messages about Julia and all this stuff, and I actually have my notes here. And it was actually on Monday, September 26th of 2011, was the first time that I received an attachment or like a link to something claiming that Julia Decatur, your ex-girlfriend, who doesn't have an ex-boyfriend, ex-girlfriend, was something not appropriate. Then on April 3rd, 2014, I went back to that link, and I even went to the cache server of Bing, because I know Bing caches things, and I typed in exactly what was sent to me originally, because I not only wrote it down on paper, because as you will learn, all my stuff was being siphoned, and I actually have it right here in my Facebook inbox, right here, from Leanne Locken. In 2014, I go back to that link, and I'm thinking, God, can people call me Pollyanna, maybe I'm wrong, but can people, the average, I guess it's called you're a civilian, get records to Collin County, Texas.gov /NGEL search ASPX. I don't know if that, and I'm saying I don't know if that's you have to have to law enforcement, or if that's something that you can just get. But in 2014, I went back to that and I typed everything in just exactly as I saw it, and I got a statement that says, forbidden, not authorized to locate. And I remember, I was like, wow. Don't know if even in the Bing server, I didn't know. However, I will say this, Rich, I do know that she was at your computer one time prior to you going off on her. Let's go on to the next thing. So today you will learn, as I previously stated, some of the evidence that proves Leanne Locken not only was lying these years when she claimed her innocence and claimed to me that you're not only a criminal, you're not a criminal for the act of committing the crime, you're a criminal for getting caught. But also, I connected every single bit of this evidence through the process of her old business partner downloading the Facebook security logins at Karen Lucan's birthday party at the original Primo's off McKinney Avenue in 2013, where Leanne was sitting like this at the table, shaking her leg like Teresa Giudice on Real Housewives of New Jersey. And I really thought the table was going to come over on me because, you know, I've been the recipient of her abuse and so have other people. However, I also connected everything not only from those logins because Leanne not only identified her devices as Leanne's iPad, Leanne's home, Leanne's this, and I get if you're working together, then you probably do have each other's logins. But those IPs, Leanne knew that day when her leg was shaking and I thought that table was going to come over across from me, that I had caught her. I also got it from email message headers. As I stated previously, Leanne and I were best friends, or I thought best friends, for many years prior to this. And so on the message header, as I stated in the previous podcast, that you can go to a message header and you can do inspect element message header and you can see the IPs from the actual Wi-Fi, from the device. And, you know, sometimes people actually have, when they term their computer, like suspect number 3 did, Paul Lemon. He actually termed his computer as Paul Lemon's PC. So did suspect number 4, Stacey Geringer, as Stacey's PC. Well, Leanne did the same thing with her computer, her iPad, and her phone. So therefore, I was able to connect all this, not because I had like a vision in my dreams, but because of the IP addresses, as I stated in the previous podcast. But this one is Leanne. So these, not only from these Facebook security logins. So deny all you want, but I have the evidence. But from the email message headers. Then I found also when I was printing off like crazy these email message headers and I was reading them. I didn't really understand at the time computer forensics or IP addresses message headers, but I was making note of anything that looked what I would consider odd. At the time, in 2013, when I was being psychologically warfare, I was being bullied, I was being slandered, I was being, you know, you name it, it happened. And you'll learn throughout the years. There was one thing that I found on this particular email from Leanne, which I thought was very interesting. This email that Leanne sent me on January 29th of 2013, it was a Tuesday at 7:38 p.m. The subject, you'll find this interesting. Please write a review of my book. It will help me. So in those message headers, which I have hundreds of message headers from Leanne, there was something on here that I found very interesting called whitelist. And I thought, I've only seen that on one of Shell Reyes's emails. So a whitelist means that you allow that sender to get through on your contacts list. Well, you know what? I can see now why, Leanne, you really are what I'm not a psychologist, what I would call a real true narcissist, because you whitelisted your email address on this particular email, the only one that I found of the hundreds, because it said, please write a review of my book. Anything to help you. Didn't know you could whitelist something. So then as my world was blowing up, and my email address, Parris@thetoprung.org, which I had had for years at that time, was not delivering and receiving emails, and you will learn other people's didn't either. I was setting up Gmail accounts as probably comparable to when we all went through COVID and we were going through toilet paper like mad. We were staying at home, we were trying to get off the shelves. So at that time, I was setting up Gmail email addresses, not realizing that a suspect who you will learn about, Damian Liu, worked for Google. Didn't realize that not every corner I took, everything I tried to do to keep Leanne and Cheryl and everybody else out of my stuff was only causing me high cortisol levels and a headache. So on Thursday, May 23rd of 2013 at 2:26 p.m., Leanne Locken sent a test email to the very first Gmail account that I set up. Because Parris the Top Rung, people were not receiving emails, I was showing up meetings, I stated this previously, and so I couldn't figure out what's going on. So Leanne sent a test email from her iPhone. When Leanne sent that test email, she not only sent it, and I'm not sure what she really wanted to do, other than I found a Google diverter and I found other things within that Gmail account. But when Leanne sent that, in true Leanne first right, freedom of speech, First Amendment right, it was my belief that she sent that part of like being able to get into my email because she deleted the email, but Leanne forgot that when you delete an email, that you have to delete it from the deleted box. You can't just, and a bunch of other emails from clients that I had at the time, from those websites that I was starting to build, were also deleted in that same deleted box. So again, if you're gonna commit a crime, you know, Leanne, you're not a criminal for the act of committing the crime. You're only a criminal if you get caught, and consider yourself caught because you're in the deleted box. There were multiple IPs on here, including Leanne's home IP, but she tried to use a router to mask, or what's known as like, seriously, hide my ass, to mask the true identity of where you're coming from. Oh, but Leanne, you know, I may have been poisoned later and had the belt removed from my car and all kinds of stuff, and, you know, a yellow spider that's poisonous that bit me, and, you know, all kinds of stuff, you know, trying to, I would assume, rid me. I was, you know, but I can say this. I'm here, and I'm reading these IPs clearer than ever. So, tortious interference by 2013 was in full force, not only by Cheryl Reyes, but by Paul Lemon, and you'll learn about Paul, because Paul thinks he's scapegoated this, and he hasn't, and neither is Stacey Geringer, neither is AJ, neither has Damian Liu, neither is Kathy Ortega, and all of your aliases. But right now we're talking about Leanne. You didn't scapegoat anything, and you're right, I'm still here. So that would be considered tortious interference. So not only was I trying to keep up with my reputation, keep up with my technology, keep up with like my health, I was also being intervened by my business. I was trying to keep my business open into the fact that I could no longer, and Scott Murray, to this day, now you know why I was no longer allowed, or had the ability to finish your website, yours and Doug's for Murray Media, Frank Vendetta, I was never able to finish your website with Primos, Greg Thompson, CBS Distribution, I was never able to finish these websites, and I can prove, because tortious interference happened with not only Leanne Lockett, but Cheryl Reyes, AJ, Damian Liu, Paul Lemon, Stacey Geringer, and Kathy Ortega. That's just tortious interference. In case you don't know what that means you're interfering with somebody's ability to make money, to have a livelihood, and when it comes to technology, I mean, deny all you want. So, previously I stated a router, and in that word I meant to say VPN. VPNs were used to try to mask the true identity of the IP. But those IPs were not truly hidden. And, you know, my over a decade experience, front row seat with popcorn and all, I was able to determine what was used. So I used the word router when I really meant VPN. I now get to an email that was an illegal login on my Gmail account. Not only the test email, but another one. And this one involved, I did the geo-tracking on this, and it went to a pawn shop in Dallas, Texas. And it was masked through the IP address, or the VPN was the true identity of the IP address, not the VPN, was 166.137.120.241. I was able to do the geo-tracking, which is a pawn shop in Dallas, Texas. I sat down at Meek and Cena's shortly after this, after I realized that Leanne, as you will learn, was logged into not only my Gmail, my Facebooks, and my father's stuff. And another victim was sitting there at the table with us. And I do have the unlicensed attorney innate ability to get the truth out of people. And I got Leanne to admit that, yes, she was at the pawn shop on this day at this time. And she was there, supposedly, with Steve Kimball. If you remember Steve Kimball from the Real Housewives of Dallas, he was her event planner. I call him Fabulous Steve. His boyfriend at the time, buying a chandelier, or looking for chandeliers for the home that she and Rich Chamberlain live in to this day. I had the geo-tracking with the IP address and everything right here. So now we're going to get to another victim. Her name was Missy Laurent. She is also deceased. She's no longer with us. Missy took the unfortunate act of taking her life in November of 2022. I will say this, and I get chills saying this, Missy, like Julia Decatur, myself, Tara Harper, Deandra Simmons, was also the unfortunate recipient of Leanne Locken's demise, whether that was behind a computer, verbally, or assault. Missy had, in 2011, had emails and logins that were being accused on her. Later, through my IP, trace routes, my IP, figuring things out and connecting IP addresses, that IP address 64.12.78.142 actually belonged to Leanne Locken. Leanne sent me an email prior or after this hit job, and I call it a hit job because that's what happened to me and Deandra and Tara and Missy. Prior to that, but on March 2nd of 2011, Leanne sent me an email. And that email subject was, please review and let me know if okay to print. That email message header gave me the IP address 64.12.78.142, which belongs to American Online because Leanne had AOL. And that actually belonged to one of the logins that was blamed on Missy Laurent by Leanne and somebody else. But it was actually Leanne doing it. And it wasn't until recently, this year, 2023, in my evidence review and getting over my own tears and trauma, that I was able to come to those terms and conclusions, because yes, I have collected evidence for 12 years. So I wish that I was here to say and to vindicate Missy Laurent, but unfortunately I'm not. But I do want to state what happened. Also, as I stated earlier, that I was experiencing many what I'd call tortious interference, where I would show up at meetings, and I say this in a previous podcast, and people would say they didn't get my email, or they didn't get, and they'd go, we sent you an email, or I would send people an email and they said we didn't get it. Well, normally that would be the best excuse, or one of the most common, I would believe or assume, excuses that people send when they really didn't do something. Maybe it slipped their mind, but if something slipped my mind, if you know me, you know I'm going to tell you, I'm sorry, I slipped my mind. I'm not going to make that excuse up. However, at this time, my emails were not getting to people. In this particular situation, it belongs another victim named Denise Wall Reed. Denise was a major victim of this situation. But I will say this in the front end. Paul Lemon was also identified as somebody that didn't get one of my emails and called me an idiot. And we'll get to that in a later podcast. But that IP address, Paul, just logged you right in. So let's get back to Denise. Denise Wall Reed is another victim and witness to the situation. Denise Wall Reed, way back on February 18th of 2013, Denise tried to send an email from her business email address. You will learn later on in this podcast that Denise was one of the many victims who owned their own company as an entrepreneur, who worked their rear off to do right, and their domain was spewing spam. Well, this particular day, her emails that she was sending out to clients became undeliverable. At the time, 2013, Denise had a company called Strat Healthcare, and her domain was strathealthcare.com. At that time, in 2013, her email address was dmwallreed, WALRAED, at strathealthcare.com. She was trying to send her clients an email, and that email bounced back, saying delivery to the following recipients was aborted. Well, with that, at that time, early on, IP addresses were attached to that. And the IP address 10.6.12.15 bounced back with that. That IP address belongs to and can be attached to Leanne Locken. At least with one email, and I'm sure as I finish my deep dive through this podcast, there may be others. Through an email that Leanne sent me on February 18th of 2013, and the subject was St. Patrick's Day budget. And I, Parris Rigby, would consider this karma at its finest. As you will learn with Paul Lemon and that email that he sent me saying I was an idiot, Leanne was very tough on me about a budget that year. I'd been doing those parties for 8 years, and I am the stickler at budgets. But for whatever reason, I think karma was at its finest, because Leanne felt the need to send me a really nasty email as though I was irresponsible with money and irresponsible with what was happening. But I later learned that was a form of psychological warfare. We'll get into that later. But that IP address, and then I also on my notes here have look at IP address 173.201.192.111 that also belonged to Leanne Locken, which was part of that bounce back. So one other thing that on computer number 1 or computer number 2, and you will learn about my computers and how fast I was going through them. I was going through them as fast as I was moving, as fast as I was going through email addresses, as fast as I was having keys that say new old, new old. There was a page that a gentleman named Pete and I found on one of my computers, 1 or 2. And Pete was an amazing security guy who got his stuff all sabotaged. You'll learn about Pete. But there was a page we found called recenthost.txt. And it has a list of IP addresses. Most of them are what we term IPv4s, meaning there's 2 or 3 digits, dot 2 or 3 digits, dot 1, 2, 3 digits, dot 2, 3 digits. And on this, because of my, I don't know if you want to call it OCD or my, teaching abilities or whatever it was, I had to come up with forms to do routines and procedures via paper, like you came over the Mayflower. I could put things on computers because you'll learn that my stuff was siphoned quick. So I printed this off and I started writing down as I'm putting these IP addresses, because I've got like 6 notebooks full of IP addresses and who they came from and where they came from originally and what their original, hosting server and everything else I'll teach you. Leanne Locken, as well as Cheryl Rios, as well as Patrick Tetrick, as well as Mike Pointer from Point to Point Security, as well as a company that I don't remember ever hearing about this, but I know there's so many companies set up, as you'll learn, named Endurin International Group, as well as others, and Paul Lemon were the proud recipients of every document that I was typing on my computer, every email that I was sending, everything that I was doing on my computer. And what they did is kind of like, in the old Rolodex, before we had, the computers or cell phones, we had a Rolodex. You would flip it and it would come up to somebody's name. This was a Rolodex of IP addresses. And they were hosts to who received the documents from my computer and then who sent it out to who. And they were doing this through Internet Explorer. Well, Leanne, again, consider yourself caught. And not only caught from your AOL and everything else that you had, but your own home server, your own home Wi-Fi. Even though you changed your Wi-Fi to 5 different Wi-Fi services, I guess you were taken after Cheryl Rios, because Cheryl pretty much tapped into every single Wi-Fi server host that I could come up with. But regardless, consider yourself caught, Stacey Geringer included. In 2013, things were really ramping up. This was pre-arsenic poisoning, pre-moving 5 times, pre-belt being removed from my car, pre-a gun being pointed at me twice, pre-a magical yellow spider that was supposedly poisonous landing on me from my clothes. I realized that Cheryl Rios and Leanne Locken were not only involved, but they would go to a Starbucks and use the public Wi-Fi called Wayport. And they sat there and they logged into my second family's, Dan Condis's. I'm sure you're familiar with Condis and Condis Law, Craig Ranch, some of their nightclubs back in the day. But they illegally used a public Wi-Fi, Starbucks, to log into Dan Condis's email. They sent Leanne Locken and Cheryl Rios from the same IP, sent a test email to Dan Condis's email from the server Safari. They also forwarded an email from his now current girlfriend a decade later, and they resent a link. Cheryl Rios and Leanne Locken resent a link from Google information, and that was through a public Wi-Fi, Wayport. There were other things that were done, but it was very apparent to me at that time that not only was Cheryl Rios, she was like, recruiting people by the dozens, but Leanne, all those years that you called Parris Rigby a liar, you called me a liar, and you said I was crazy and this and that, and you weren't a criminal, Really? One thing also that Leanne Locken did with the IP address 166.147.78.254, Leanne Locken logged into my father, Jay Rigby's Facebook page. I confronted Leanne Locken about this at a charity dinner / birthday dinner at one of Kent Rathburn's restaurants off McKinney Avenue. Leanne and I arrived before everybody else. We sat at the bar. I asked Leanne, why are you logging into my Parris Rigby's and my father's info? At that time, I don't back down. If you know me, I don't. Leanne raised her arm and I thought Leanne Locken was going to hit me. We actually got separated like two juveniles, kindergartners at that dinner table. Leanne, I told you I was going to expose this. And yes, you were in my father's, not only one time, but multiple IPs in my father's Facebook. We have a whole stack here, and that'll be part 2 of suspect number 2. I want to say thank you to all the men and women in all of our bureaus and law enforcement, and to all the men and women in our military, because you put your life on the line every single day. And people don't realize it's not only your physical self, but it's your mental self. And I want to say thank you so much to the Officer of the Century, Dominga Rivera, who's producing this podcast. We will start up next time with part 2 of Leanne Locken, and then we're going to move right into what happened, and then I'm just going to start naming suspects as they did what they did. Until then, make sure you have your milk duds and popcorn ready. See you then.